Morning everyone, back to my channel, back to Bulgaria. Just want to talk about a couple of things. Well, yesterday our Prime Minister Keir Starmer was in Washington talking to Trump, and I think a lot of the Brits were pretty unhappy and pretty embarrassed. I think a lot of us are feeling quite embarrassed, and I never thought I would feel embarrassed, because I was always the type of person that I was never especially proud in the first place, and I always thought that, well, if you're not the type of person to be that proud, then you're probably not the type of person to get particularly embarrassed about things. But as it turns out, when things are getting as bad as they are, it is quite embarrassing. I was on X, and I don't think I'm the only British person that is feeling that way at the moment. So Keir Starmer says to Trump, in front of everyone, he says that there's no free speech problem in the UK, and it's got a proud history and continues to have a proud history of free speech in the UK. So it reminded me of a Soviet saying, which was, "We know that you know that we know you're lying." Okay, and I put that on X, and I think it resonated with people. Now the thing to say about that is, that expression, if I'm not mistaken, that expression comes from towards the end of the Soviet Union. You know, when you tell so many lies, and each lie has to be backed up by another 10 lies to support that lie, and everything kind of spirals out of control. That was towards the end. So if we're in a situation now where that's how we are in the UK, we know that you know that we know you're lying, and that is how it is. What does that say about the stage that we're at? Is it, kind of looks like it's collapsing. I always try to think about, because it's hard to gauge, I think even if you live there, but certainly when you don't live there, it's hard to gauge what percentages of people think what. And I always think there's kind of three categories. You've got the ones that are aware of what's happening, and they have their kind of certain personality profile, and they have a certain social circles, hang around with different people, have different jobs. Then you've got the ones that are completely unaware, but I think those people can sense it, because my mum doesn't engage at all, and she lives in a really kind of a nice area where there's no trouble really at all, and even she says she can sense it. And then you've got the third group, which I always call, for want of a better term, I always call them the government people. These are people that go along with the government no matter what they do, no matter what they say. And so I don't know how those three groups break down percentage-wise. But either way, I guess the point is, I think one of the stumbling blocks we have is this: we can't get this boomer truth regime kind of meme out of our psyche. The idea that it's a democracy, and you know, on the conveyor belt of hopium, after the next election we'll be able to vote for someone. I think that is so debilitating. I think it's so debilitating for our psyche, our culture, our mentality. I think if we were more aware that the situation is, it's not a democracy, and you can't vote your way out of anything. Even if you could, which I don't believe you can, because I think that the system is a stitch up. But even if you could, you still got the malleability of the population. I don't know, at least a third, at the very minimum a third, will believe absolutely anything. Then you've got all their kind of psychological traits that they've got, their childhood trauma, their weaponized narcissism. Look, I think the idea of us being a democracy is debilitating to us, and I think we need to move on from that and deal with the situation as it is, because I've always believed that, or for a while now I've always believed that when you hear people say, well, we need to wake up, that isn't going to make any difference. They're not going to give away an empire just because a bunch of plebs have woken up. So, you know, sometimes it's a bit like careful what you wish for, because waking up might mean being locked up, because, as I say, they're not going to give away all their power just because a handful of people have become aware of what they're up to. So that's the situation in the UK. Oh, you still got that controlled opposition, what I call the 90s boomer right-wing media, like talk radio and all this kind of stuff. My word. I hope there's not too many younger people that watch that. But anyway, so that's the UK. And then you got, now this is something that I'm really interested in. I think this is an unbelievable situation that's happening in Romania. Okay? I never remember the name of the guy. Anyway, there's a, I think you know who I mean. He's the guy that's running in Romania, was running in Romania to become president of that country. And must have been about a month ago. They annulled the elections in Romania because they, according to the polls, it was way beyond the margin of error that he was going to win. Okay, so they annulled the elections, and they came up with a load of nonsense about, well, guess what? Like Russian interference. There's always Russian interference, never CIA interference, or EU interference, or MI6 interference. Always Russian interference. So they annulled the elections. Absolute crickets from all the people that go on about democracy. They spend all their time going on about democracy in Ukraine, how Trump's a threat to democracy. None of these people have any sincerity. That's the problem. And so when they make their claims about being concerned about democracy, people take what they're saying on face value. And you know, they're not sincere. They're just kind of like I say, I call them government people. So anyway, this is it Grudescu, someone from the guy from Romania. So he has his elections annulled. They say it's Russian interference. TikTok videos, Russia sponsored. Spend a couple of $100,000 on TikTok videos to influence the Romanian people to vote for someone who is against the war, antithetical to NATO, antithetical to the EU. That's a lot of people anyway. But as JD Vance said the other day, and it's absolutely bleeding obvious, it's an obvious point, but he made it, like how weak must the democracy be if you have to cancel or annul, is the word they're using, It's really postponed, I think, until I think it's a couple of months' time. How weak do you have to be as a democracy if you have to cancel your elections because Russia splashed some cash, a couple $100,000, so you cancel your elections, and all that is obviously saying that means that Russia can have an influence in elections whenever it wants. Now, obviously, it's a load of nonsense in the first place. That's not why they cancelled it. But so the reason I link what's happening in the UK and Romania together, and if you can research this, and I'm going to write an article about this on Substack. Okay, my Substack is Spiritual Psyop, and also on Twitter, Spiritual Psyop. I'm going to write an article about this because it's happening in so many places in Europe. There's been interference everywhere. What's his name? Didec in Slovakia. I mean, they shot him 4 times. No, the average person doesn't even know about it. This is what I mean by it. It's got a lot of similarities to the Soviet Union. You've got leaders getting shot, assassination attempts. You've got the cancellation of elections because he was going to win. But you've got the guy in where is it? Serbia. It's all the people. Look, it's all the people that are speaking out against the globalist regime. They're either getting shot or they're getting arrested. Okay, and the point on the population kind of angle of it is, what percentage of the European population knows that the Slovakian president had an attempt on his life? What percentage of the population know that, is it TJ Hopkins in Germany, is now going to jail because he wrote a book that the regime doesn't like? You see, this is the problem. A third know. A third would like to know, I think, but don't know, because the propaganda machine is very powerful at shutting down information. You know, we always associate propaganda with like pushing an agenda, but they're unbelievable at covering it up. And so then you got the other third, the government people, who will just say, oh, it's not true, no matter what. They will just reactively just say, no, it's not true. But they'll believe you if you say that Trump did something undemocratic. They'll believe you if anything that's antithetical to the regime, if you tell them that they've done something undemocratic, they'll believe you immediately. In fact, they'll believe you with no evidence. They'll just take your word for it. But if there's piles of evidence, for example, the 2020 US election, if there's piles of evidence suggesting a certain narrative, but if that narrative is antithetical to the regime, then those people that will believe you on face value when you say something favourable to the regime won't believe you, conversely, when there's all the evidence in the world. So, as far as I'm concerned, that is just that's just like being a controlled, programmed robot with no morals, no principles, nothing. Anyway, you know, as I say, I fundamentally don't believe in the concept of democracy. So you could say, well, why do they matter if you don't believe in democracy? Well, they're there to shut people down, aren't they, socially? You know, you can't speak, because there's always going to be, if you're in the Western countries at least, you can't speak because there's always going to be one of them there to sort of have a narcissistic breakdown and shut down discourse. Anyway, so that's linking together the situation in UK and Romania. Now, finally, to finish up with Romania, because that was only the first part. So so now what's happened is he was on his way to register. He was the elections were annulled about a month ago, and only a couple of days ago now, he was on his way to register for his to be a candidate for the currently annulled elections, which I think are going to take place either next month or the month after that. And they detained him, and they came up. I'm going to be better prepared eventually, and I might do some videos from home with better preparation. But if you could see, you can research it. If you see the allegations, really crazy, you know, spreading disinformation, you know, saying things that could be understood by some people in some contexts as problematic. Okay, we're at that level now. Okay, so that reminds me of another point. I don't know if I made this out on a previous video, but it's important. So what I think happens among our people that come from our culture, our country, is the idea that we have in our heads of totalitarian systems is very exaggerated. I used to speak to a lot of people in Spain that lived under Franco, spoken to plenty of people here that have lived under their communist regime, and I think that the ideas that we have, perceptions that we have of these regimes is massively exaggerated. Okay? And so when we imagine totalitarianism, we imagine like an absolute horror show every day, that you can't go to walk in the park like this, like every single thing is a horror show. And so when a totalitarian system regime comes to us, we don't recognize it, because that's not what we're expecting. We're expecting some kind of movie where everyone getting shot up against the wall every day. And it's not like that. Like, I've lots of friends, older people that have lived under Franco in Spain. The way they describe it is like the UK is now. Same in the Soviet Union. It's not an ideological point. I don't think tyrannies are much worse than this. And don't forget, they're writing every story that we've ever read. Imagine if the West were to fall and an adversary of the West, a powerful adversary like China or Russia or whatever, imagine if they were able to scrutinize everything the West had done. Well, that would be that'd be pretty horrific if you were Chinese or Russian and you were born into Russia or China, and you were taught history of the West through the lens of a collapsed West that's being taught by an adversary. I think a lot of these regimes are as bad as each other, but I think it's getting pretty bad in UK, and I think it's getting pretty bad in Europe, and I think we're at a situation where kind of all bets are off. Because what do you do if you're Romanian? What do you do if you're Romanian and you want to go and protest? You're going to get arrested like they did in Washington when they protest the MAGA protest. You're going to get a load of abuse. Why is the abusive people always on the side of the government? And why don't people notice that? I've never heard anyone notice that. All the narcissistic kind of abuse people are always on the side of the government. So you're going to go through all that. You risk getting arrested yourself. This is if you're Romanian. And the other thing, where are all the people? There used to be people that would not necessarily agree with Bugescu, but they would have stood up for him on principle. Where are all these principle people? They don't have any kind of intellectual backbone. They just say it's made up. But that doesn't demonstrate any kind of intellectual grasp of the subject. If you just say it's made up, you're not demonstrating that you know the subject. You know. So, I mean, for example, they're pretending to know the subject. They don't know the subject, and they use all these like narcissistic, linguistic, kind of very bland substanceless ways of speaking, whereby they get to argue with you without knowing anything about the subject or without demonstrating any knowledge of the subject. It's like you could do that with any subject. You could pretend to know about football, and then someone asks you questions about it, and you say, no, I don't want to talk about that, it's propaganda. Okay? You're not demonstrating any knowledge of the subject. So, anyway, I think this is going to be, if you're not paying attention to this stuff that's happening in Europe, with regard to, look, the countries to focus on in Europe are Slovakia, Hungary, Serbia, and Romania, because they're the dissident countries, and they're kind of dropping the mask. In the EU are kind of dropping the mask because they're doing all these things in plain sight. And as far as I can tell, the things that they've got to rely on are the media that won't tell people. So most people will say, what are you talking about? That sounds like a conspiracy, even though you can just look at it. So that's the first tool they have. And the second tool they have are their people, their government people, as I call them, to shut people down. Now, if you've got those two tools, basically all bets are off. You can just do what you want. I mean, imagine if they started arresting supporters. What would happen? What would they do? What recourse do they have? If the media doesn't tell anyone, if the media not only doesn't tell anyone, but says if anyone says that, it's a conspiracy and they're these terrible people, it's an all bets are off kind of situation. I mean, we know that the people with EU flags and Ukrainian flags in their bios, what would they do if Romania, Slovakia started rounding up, 5% of its population? Would be obviously a lot of people. Would they say anything? Would they accept it's true? Would they even accept it was true? There's no evidence whatsoever. What do they say? Judge a person's the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. Well, if that's true, that means these people, these government people, as I call them, won't do anything under any circumstance to help anyone, no matter how serious the situation. What other conclusion is there to draw? So, I don't know. I think people are gonna have to be aware of what's happening in Europe, because things are pretty serious. Anyway, so on a more lighter note, I was buying some vegetables earlier in Bulgaria, and this woman, this is the first time it's happened, I've been here about 6 years, and this woman started having a go at me for not speaking Bulgarian. I do speak Bulgarian, but you know what she means, not very well. She starts having a go at me. I was already a bit stressed because there's loads of people in the shop, and I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just, anyway, she starts having a go at me, and I don't remember, I'm sure that's happened in Spain before when I was younger, at some point. But the Spanish would have said something, like the other Spanish in the shop, they say like shut up or whatever to her. No one said anything. They just like let her have a go at me. Anyway, and in England they'd say something, someone would tell her to shut up. In Spain someone would tell her to shut up. I don't know what they do in Brazil, but they'd probably tell her to shut up. They normally tell you to shut up, but the shop was full, and no one said anything. I don't know, guess they couldn't be bothered. Anyway, that's the video for today. I'm going to make more videos about this political situation in Europe, because I think it is, if nothing else, I mean, it doesn't have to be something to get angry about. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I don't know if it's because I've got Asperger's that I find it so fascinating, but it is fascinating. Anyway, I'm gonna sign off. Look these mountains come out in the video. I don't know, I can't tell if you can see them or not, but anyway, they're very beautiful. down by the river. Okay, I'll be making more videos. Hopefully they're going to get better, and I'll see you next time.